Okay, so thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back to our FASD Awareness webinar this month. I'm delighted to be able to introduce to you our founder, Tracy Allen. Tracy is one of the great pioneers of support of communities, of individuals and families having fought desperately hard to get recognition and to get diagnosis and to get support for her own charges when, as a family of foster carers, they were faced with individuals with FASD and the struggles that they encountered. They thought, well, do you know what? We do not want others to have to go through that battle, and we want people to learn from what we've been through. So she set up FASD Awareness. Tracy, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit, first of all, about a brief introduction? There is a webinar that we've already had where we've gone into the detail of how you got involved in FASD in the first place, but can you just give us a bit of a summary of how you've got to where you are today with the FASD community and FASD awareness particularly?
So back in the day when we were young, we decided after having 3 of our own birth children to foster children, which, in our early 30s, really, we were very young and quite green behind the ears and a bit naive. So we then had quite a few children come through the door, and we had our young people come through with all different disabilities, but we did have some long-term placements with FASD and FAS. So that really became our focus and our passion, and opened our eyes up not only to that condition, but just about disabilities in general. We've never had anybody in our family with a disability in the past, so very naive to the barriers and the fights and the struggles. And we learned very fast, how to sort of try and navigate our way through.
Excellent. And can you tell us why, I gave you a bit of an idea of why FASD awareness was set up, but what was the biggest battle that you faced that you thought, do you know what, we're not going to have this, we're going to set up so that we can support families? It was originally, wasn't it, in the Southeast? That was the network that you started with.
I mean, as a family of, 7 of us in the family, trying to get the needs identified correctly, supported, the needs of our other children as well, our needs as parents, getting the right schools, the right type of education, services, just everything, funding. It was just all the way through from start to finish. Every day was like a battle, and you just get over one hurdle, and then all of a sudden you've got another one. And when you're managing all of that, and then you're also managing behaviours and trying to get support yourself as a family to be able to do that. And the word I sort of say is it was quite relentless, and it wasn't the children at times, it was just the process of getting things in place where, as families, when you're dealing with children, with complex needs and disabilities, it's quite hard on a daily basis anyway, without having all of those other barriers and, loads of emails, evidencing and advocating to try and get professionals to recognise, especially with, it being mostly a hidden disability. A lot of people, unless it's a physical disability, don't seem to get their needs identified as quickly or, in the way that they need, because especially if they've got communication issues as well, and the families are exhausted.
Now, you had a bit of an advantage to a degree, didn't you? Because you had siblings, and one had, what was the 2 different diagnoses? Because they were very different parts of the spectrum, weren't they? So you had a real mix in your family setup. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean, all my children are different, which is lovely, and they've all got their strengths and weaknesses. And, all the children that came through our door, really, most of them, even if they didn't have a disability, might have some sort of trauma or something that they need support with. So with FASD, you've got the different ends of the spectrum. So you've got the FAS, where you've got the facial features, so it's quite distinctive, and people seem to give you a little bit more allowances, and because they can see that there's a difference. But then if you've got no facial features and it's very hidden and you're masking it, which a lot of young people can mask this, especially young girls seem to be able to mask it a lot easier than boys, then it sort of goes under the radar, and then you're sort of working at two ends of the spectrum. So throughout our journey as a family, we would be working with specialist schools. Everything was specialist, and having to get specialist clubs and equipment and everything on one level. Then you've got the mainstream side of trying to work with more of a hidden disability to get society and the things to wrap around, maybe not in such a high level, but to be actually doing the right thing and identifying and just putting a few reasonable adjustments in place so that that person could really succeed, and just by those few little things, it can really make a difference where they can get GCSEs or pass certain goals in their life.
We've spoken with Raja Mukherjee in the past, who diagnoses FASD with the multidisciplinary approach, and he has really specified that one of the areas of understanding that the facial features of FAS, they are created in a very, very small area in the first trimester, aren't they? I mean, we're talking
that 3-day window.
Yeah, exactly. And so if mother is drinking during that period, there is a highly likelihood of facial features being produced. But if mum's drinking throughout the entire pregnancy but doesn't drink during that period, there might not be those facial features. So, and that occurs in 10% of those that are diagnosed, probably less than 10% of those that are diagnosed. And yet that is the area that doctors and pediatricians will look for, because they can tick that box. And that's where it is very much a hidden disability, isn't it? And frequently it will be misdiagnosed for ADHD and all the other diagnoses that come alongside as comorbidities frequently with FASD. You experienced both ends of that spectrum, didn't you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was really hard. And one of the things that I learned from a social worker was the scaffolding that you naturally want to do for any child that's struggling. If you saw somebody in a wheelchair struggling to walk, you'd be picking them up, you'd be guiding them, you would be lifting them, you would be, getting that chair for them. But when you've got somebody that, physically is able and can talk and walk and presents, like they're all singing and dancing, but they're really struggling. And as families, on the outside, when you've got a little tiny window as a social worker, a doctor or a teacher, that can only see that little window, you're not seeing really what's going on, and you're not seeing all that scaffolding behind. And family members, we all do this naturally because we all want them to achieve and thrive and be part of a family unit. So this natural scaffolding happens, and I don't think really most families realize how much they're doing.
Yeah.
And sometimes actually that can be disempowering at times, because you're trying to be kind, and sometimes being kind can disempower people where they need really people to empower them.
Exactly. And I'm always interested in being able to give some qualifications here behind your experience. What qualifies you today, apart from your lived experience? You've gone on, as a foster carer, I know the amount of training that we have as foster carers and how much research we have to go into so many other areas. Can you tell us some of the experiences you've had and your journeys that foster care has taken you into other areas of that sector?
It's just, like for me, it's the journey where I didn't expect. I mean, being a manager of a co-op years ago, and then, I started to work for a charity volunteering for 10 years, and I'd done family group conferencing, advocacy, mediation, anger management, and I absolutely loved that. And it taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about the families that were out there, the need, and also how to support them in those areas. And one of the areas with anger management with young children, I would go into schools and do like a program for 6 weeks with them, and they're like 5 or 6 with these problems and being branded with anger management. But I really learned early on that this communication with people is key at whatever age. They're expressing themselves. So this anger was frustration, and it was about really trying to help them to be able to communicate. So throughout my whole journey, then we started to look at fostering, which obviously lots of training there. There was lots of training within the charity, which was lovely. And then I've done recently a diploma 5 in adult social care and management, which I'm quite proud of, which I managed to get through COVID and do very, very glad, in the end, so relieved.
And run a charity as well.
And run a charity, and
Yeah.
at the time was literally working throughout COVID with the supported living business, working, sometimes 4 nights on the road, 24-hour care, and managing staff and keeping people safe. And I don't know how many COVID policies I read and saw and designed, but there you go. We got through that. But my staff say with the supported living as well, I'm a person that I really live by the rule that if I'm not willing to do it myself, I won't ask other people to do it. So me and my husband as directors, we do all the same training as our staff. So we are on call. We know exactly, how to respond. We know how to react, and we also can go in and do the job alongside our staff, which I think is really beneficial. So I think, over the years, we've done lots and lots of training, and then the lived experience sort of really underpinned it all, because then we could use that training in a real way. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I think, when we offer training to all sectors of the industry, one of the things that comes across most of all is that we're able to back it up with the lived experience, the stories that we tell of the families that we support. Now, we've seen, haven't we, as a charity at FASD Awareness, a dramatic increase in your one-to-one clinics, for an example, of those that are really hitting crisis point. And when we do our evaluations on all of these afterwards, we look at what the trajectory is. And we know from our own journeys, we've both been fostering for over 20 years. And so we've seen children that have come to us as very young individuals transitioning into adulthood. And we understand that cliff edge that people talk about as they transition into adulthood through social care. Can you tell us about that really important transitioning into adulthood, the risks, the problems that we face as well, before we go into why you set up your businesses in the way that you did? Can you give us an insight into really what are those problems that we face?
The problems I see on a daily basis, and I've experienced myself in the early stages, is, you might get a young child that, whether it's fostered, adopted, birth, with a disability of any description, doesn't have to be FASD. And, you maybe don't want a label, you don't want to, people are sort of steering you out, you don't need to have a diagnosis, it's very needs led, you don't need that assessment, or you can't get that assessment because, you're banging your head against the wall. There's lots of barriers. But knowing now what I know, it's about identification early on, as soon as you can, getting the right assessments in place early on. So it's about identifying, getting the assessments, and then being able to make a lovely support plan or management plan that everybody's part of, and that young person can, gradually, as they get older, take a bit more control of. So that for me is key, to be able to start that transition. And the earlier that these things are in place, I really do believe that the transition can be really successful. And I think that's one of the keys for definite.
Absolutely. And it's important to also understand as well the diagnosis process, isn't it? We've had a question come up here. There is one clinic in the country in Red Hill with Dr. Raja Mukherjee's clinic, and that is where diagnosis is obtained. It's a lengthy process. It's a lengthy process because it's got such a waiting list. However, if you believe you have the symptoms of FASD, what would you recommend here to getting that diagnosis? What would be the process if you see any symptoms that you think, hold up a minute, this is tying in? It's not just ADHD, it's not just autism. Can you explain how you would
What I
suggest?
recommend to families is if they're sort of maybe thinking differently about a diagnosis, you know, they might already have those diagnoses, but then they're sort of thinking it's not quite this, and we've done a bit of research, is to start to write a diary, maybe looking at the strengths and weaknesses, go to the GP and, you know, explain what their thoughts are and give some examples, and then start to log in some files, you know, whether it's been paper files or on your laptop, what your concerns are, and also that will help you on your journey. So you've got those go-to files that you can produce at any point to the paediatricians. Hopefully if the doctor would have some awareness of FASD, and then they might be able to say, yeah, actually, yeah, what you're saying, we'll send you off to a paediatrician who can then look into it deeper. Then hopefully the paediatrician, if you present, you know, the young person there, you've got all of this evidence, or any evidence, anything like that would really support you. And it's not always about, you know, looking at the strengths and the weaknesses for anybody, because I think, you know, anybody with a disability or even without a disability, we've all got those strengths and weaknesses. And then once the paediatrician maybe will then have that knowledge again of FASD, and the problem is, what we're experiencing is, you know, throughout my practices, there's not every doctor that even knows what FASD is, not every midwife, not every paediatrician. So it sometimes can be a little bit pot luck. And also, sometimes I think professionals then feel if a parent's coming to them and they don't really understand what they're asking of them or the condition, they can be quite dismissive. So then it's a bit more frustrating, and you don't want to undermine professionals. You want to work in, you know, you want to work in partnership really, and, you know, signpost them if they really don't understand it, in a polite way, maybe to, you know, the charity or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think that can be quite helpful, because it's not even, you know, social workers, you know, there's so many conditions out there, no one knows everything, not even a doctor. So I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Autism 20 years ago, like FASD, was probably unheard of, but now everyone identifies it and understands it and knows, you know, the process to be able to get those diagnoses.
And we've recently, haven't we? We've had support groups and parent carer support groups where we've got a whole series of training that we're offering on Eventbrite coming up, and they're sending it out. It's not for them necessarily, although some of them are taking part in it, but it's really for them to be able to share those links with their school, with the teachers in the schools, with the Senkos, particularly because Senkos need upskilling on what FASD is, but also we're sharing them with the social workers as well, and the teams of social workers, with the doctors, because a lot of doctors are taking up on this as well within the integrated care systems. So, you know, that's why we offer our training. It's about upskilling people and giving people the knowledge, so there isn't that loophole, that gap that so many of us have had to face in the past. Now, let's say they've got a diagnosis. All right. And we've got that diagnosis. How do you support that individual to be able to inform them and educate them about that? You know, we've just had a youth friendship group tonight where Maggie May, who many of our listeners will know, a young adult with FASD who is an amazing advocate and ambassador for the charity, she was talking to them about FASD and about what the symptoms are and strategies and resources to be able to support them. How do you, as a carer, as a parent, as an adoptive parent or an SGO parent, how do you then look at supporting that individual in that confirmed diagnosis and understanding what that means?
The thing is, I have families come to me even now through the business, where they have a piece of paper that they probably got given when the child was 5 with a diagnosis, and that's all they've got. literally, and they have looked after that person into their like 20s, and they've done an amazing job looking after this person. But then when they come to do that transition process, there's not really that awareness of the levels of needs and identification and assessments. So that's the problem there. And also to transition into adulthood, it's about having that awareness, you know, that you're identified within a system. So you need to have your benefits, if you're entitled to those benefits, in place, so they're part of this whole sort of gathering of information, so that when you do become that adult, and you know, up to the age of 25, if you've got like EHC plans, or you've got care plans, or you're in the care system, there's that responsibility to be able to support you with that transition. So for me, that diagnosis is absolutely vital, and the earlier you get that. But that is just a piece of paper, which is great. We all need that. But it's the treatment, the support, the plan that goes around that scaffolding that I've spoken about. That really needs to be identified, and it can be identified at certain stages of that person's life as well. So, you know, you might have that some OT, some sort speech and language people come in and do some assessments. You know, if you've got a diagnosis and you've had it done by, say, Raja, he would have done a very good assessment, multidisciplinary assessment. And so that assessment to me is like a bit of a Bible. It's the go-to where, you know, you can share that with other provisions like schools and other professionals, and that whole wrap around can all come together and put that person in the center of that plan. And I think that's key. And then maybe later on, you might need to revisit that, you know, maybe 17, before they're going into sort of the next stage of their life, adulthood, to just confirm whether those things are still relevant, that these things need to be in place, or do they need to be relaxed, or is there new things that need to be considered, and also just their abilities really,
Yeah.
to see, you know.
Because you know, one of the, to add to that, we find, don't we, when with the charity, particularly with the parent carer support groups, also with the adult FASD friendship group, where they tell us what we could have done better, in a way, in understanding their behaviors better. This is something that comes up frequently. It's about, I know when we've had behavioral therapists in the past that we've done webinars with, when we've spoken to those with the lived experience and foster carers, it's about learning how to re-educate as carers and as parents, retrain ourselves how to parent differently. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so we had to really look at that differently. Communication styles, how we reacted, adapting the home. There was so many elements to it, and even now, you know, I'm constantly looking for new ideas and things. But not just for me, and I try to do it alongside the other people, whether it be in the supported living house or in the home, looking at working in partnership with them, alongside them, rather than the, you know, especially as they're getting older, they want that independence, they want to feel in control, they want to take that accountability. And I know that's hard sometimes when you've got a disability, but there are ways that they can. And the more that they take them small steps, and you know, whether it be having their own chart or little way that they remember to do things, or just even taking small steps of like decision making, then they start to be empowered to be able to feel that they're able to continue with bigger steps, bigger decisions. So when you're looking at this transition into adulthood, if this person hasn't really been able to make decisions for themselves, or take a little bit of accountability, a little bit of ownership for their life, you're asking them all of a sudden to go from nothing to 18, and now where do you want to live? What do you want to do? And it's a bit like, oh my God, you know, and you need to be able to show them what that means. They need to be totally fully informed with a communication style that they understand. So a lot of our guys are very visual, you know, writing, so a lot of easy read documents, taking them to places, letting them experience it, asking other people, YouTube channels, social stories. There's so many ways of communicating with somebody, and once they are informed, even people that I know, you know, when I work with behaviour specialists like Nick Barrett, you know, some of the stories that we know and we talk about, people that maybe are mute, that can still communicate their needs by, you know, certain expressions or certain behaviors, so that people know. And it's amazing, our young people, whether they've got a disability or not, they know exactly what they want. They just need a communication partner to be able to communicate that with them and alongside them.
And can you tell us, we had a question here about how through to the age of 15, all of a sudden 15 to 18-year-old behaviors, sometimes they can become very violent in their behaviors. Can you explain why that is? Because we've seen, and we have seen, you know, positive outcomes from many of those that really struggled with those violent and aggressive behaviors in some of the clinics that we've run at FASD Awareness. And months later, with the strategies and the resources that you've implemented and you've suggested, the families have changed their techniques and they've led to better outcomes where that individual is at the center of the decision making and they are involved in that decision making. Can you talk about the violent behaviors, why they occur? Because you understand this very well.
I think the problem is, you know, I've got two heads. So you've got the anger management head that I'm trained to do. And then I've also got, you know, the experience of having 5 kids that all don't want to do anything, you know, that especially when they're getting in that, you know, got the hormones, you've got the teenage years, you're wanting to, you know, be more independent, come away from being told what to do. So I think there's that element there. And then if you've got communication problems as well on top of that, and you're not able to maybe even understand some of your own feelings, you don't even know what these emotions are. So you have to go right back to the beginning. You have to sort of like maybe do some really sort of like work on emotions and make them have that connection, even if it's very basic. It doesn't have to be too advanced, but so that they're able to take that little bit of community, you know, take that sort of ownership. So one of the strategies are, you know, it's very simple, very black and white. Everything that we do in our house is very black and white. So when you're getting that anger, which we then identify as getting red in the face, your tummy starts rumbling, you want to clench your teeth and your hands are going, and you know, all the other things that you might want to do, is like all of us sort of like then having that, we all feel like this is normal, you're normal. But when that happens, what are we going to do? And then finding out where they want to go. Now, when I was practicing in schools, I had some amazing young people that would tell me. There was one young lad, and he said when he feels like that, he goes under his bed and strokes his cat. So, and then there was one that would go up in the garden on a tree. Then there would be one that would just go into the bathroom. You know, there were so many different strategies that, but it has to be their strategy to be able to calm them down. You can't enforce something upon somebody because it's not going to work. You have to work with them and find out how they want to manage their behaviors, and to be able to support them to find and give them ideas. You know, they might not have an idea, but give them some options, and then maybe let them try them out even and see what one works for them. So, you know, back in the day when I was parenting, it was the naughty step and then it was the naughty chair. And, you know, gone are those days really now, I think, because people, you know, it didn't work for some of mine. Some of it did, some of it didn't. So I think we have to really do things on a more of an individual basis and work with each other rather than be told what to do.
Yeah, it's about understanding that individual, understanding their triggers, understanding the things that will flag up concerns for them, but also understanding how to communicate best with them. Because if you can communicate with that individual and you can reason with them, then you're going to find better ways of being able to lead to better outcomes. Can I move on a little bit now to, there might be a lot of professionals on this call that will want to know, what is the cliff edge that we talk about? There are many different FASD individuals that are in the adoption system, that are in the care system, and SGO, special guardianship orders, that are part of family members or connected with relatives in some way that are caring for them. And there will be birth families as well. Each of these with a diagnosis, will they all have social workers? Because it's really this cliff edge that we're talking about. It's the level of support that goes into adulthood. Can you explain what that cliff edge is?
The thing is, nowadays, where the model years ago, you had a social worker that was with the family usually for years, you know, and you had that relationship and they knew you, and they would just come in and check in, and, you know, if you needed them, they would be on the end of the phone. It's not like that anymore. So usually social workers are as and when there's an incident or a crisis or a need, and then you will get allocated one from duty, and then they will be with you for that period of time, and that's it usually. Sometimes you might be under a team, like a disability team, so then you might have an allocated social worker, which is fine too. You know, it's not that they're not there, but sometimes it's just the fact that you don't need them all the time. So I don't blame them not wasting their money and giving you one all the time when you don't need it. So from the point of view of the young people, that consistency of having somebody is really key. So having, whether it be a social worker, whether it be a PA, whether it be a parent, having consistency is key to those transitions being more successful, because especially if they're coming from a care background, because there's an expectation sometimes for, you know, local authorities to, you know, drop their, you know, their care, or for them to come out of the system and go out into, you know, the community and live. And if their needs aren't identified when they're in what I would call under the care, whether it be the care of parents or the local authority, if they're not identified then when they go out into the community, that scaffolding's gone, isn't it? You know, whether it be a foster care, a mum, whoever, the scaffolding's gone. Now, a lot of young people might be able to, if they haven't got those additional needs, manage that with hardly anything. But a lot of young people with disabilities really do need to have that passed over to, you know, whether it be another service, or, you know, living independently but with some support in the community, and not just through social services. You know, I'm a real advocate for, you know, getting involved with the community and using what's out there, charities, you know, voluntary work. There's so many amazing organizations out there that you can get involved with, the church, you know, everywhere, you know. So it's that whole holistic approach of living in the community, being part of the community, and everyone wrapping around that young person in the center of that, and they're able to make that decisions and change their mind. You know, they might join this group but then change to another group, or get involved with this, you know, piece of work or volunteering. But it should be very fluid. It shouldn't be prescriptive, and it should be led and person-centered by that person.
Can you tell us about some of the real problems that we face? Because many of our FASD individuals are some of them are probably the most vulnerable people in society, aren't they? And I know we have many calls where individuals get caught up in the criminal justice system, and that isn't to say, you know, we had one carer today that was online and is one of the greatest advocates for FASD within the criminal justice system, as his son has been in the system for many years, backwards and forwards. And he stresses to say, look, this is not a foregone conclusion. This is not to say that this will happen to your child, but it is to flag up that you can be they can be incredibly vulnerable. So therefore, this wraparound network of support, that management plan, has to be in place early on. Prepare for that time. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the earlier on that you can prepare. So I would say, you know, 13, definitely start this process, you know, as a family, to be able to reach that goal at the end of it, because our young people take a lot longer to manage, you know, themselves, get their head around ideas, you know. So somebody else might just, you know, just roll with it, where a lot of people with disabilities need a little bit more time, you know, to have that understanding and to feel confident that that's what they want to do even. And, you know, even at 25, you know, young people might not be ready. They might be ready to leave home at 30, but in that meantime, there's still, you know, the needs that need to be met and recognized. So I think doing things a lot earlier is the key. Getting that assessment, getting those diagnoses is the key. And also working with that individual very early on, not telling them what they're going to do, listening to them, the art of listening is absolutely key for these young people. I don't think we listen enough to anybody. And I think asking them what their thoughts are, getting their opinion, giving them some options and listening to them really helps them map out their path. Because it doesn't matter what we want as individuals. If they don't want to do it, they're not doing it. So you could put all the money, all the things in the world and have an amazing plan, but if they're not engaged in that plan, they don't want that plan, it's going to break down.
And
So
really, sorry, I'm going to come in if I may on this, because this is, I think this is a really important point, because there are also those situations where you give them the opportunity to say what they want to say, or, you know, it might not be a realistic goal, but don't dismiss that. Don't dismiss it at all. What would you use in that example? If they are coming up with these unrealistic goals, how would you deal with that? How would you manage that?
well, you can sort of work with it, if they've got an interest, and the thing is, everyone in life has got an interest, and we all got maybe unrealistic goals or dreams and aspirations. So but you don't want somebody just to kill it and that's it, it's gone. So you can look at something, like you might want to be a DJ, say for instance, and go to Ibiza and do all of those amazing things and be like one of the people on the telly. But maybe that's not as realistic, but that doesn't stop you having a DJ lesson, having some decks, maybe playing some music, some little parties in your house, having that same sort of on a lower level. So they're still having that excitement, they're still having that opportunity, and they're still feeling that they're getting their choices met. There's nothing worse than wanting to go on a holiday and have all these things and you're just being told no all the time. It's frustrating, and then the behaviors will spill out and they will get their needs met by whatever way in the end. And you want it to be a positive pathway, not a negative pathway. That's the thing. So by working with them and exploring these things, and sometimes it could be that they do reach that goal and it is amazing.
And also, another important point to understand is that their brains are developing constantly. Jeff has given us a very important anecdote here from Canada, where they've been way in advance of us with FASD until more recently, as we heard last month. Funding is being pulled in Canada. However, they've got a lot more research, and they're seeing that the brain development in FASD individuals is developing way into their 30s. I remember as well, one of our individuals on an earlier webinar with FASD, Anik, she said that she was 19 when she started realizing there were a lot of things where she was beginning to, all of a sudden there were eureka moments. She was beginning to go, oh, I see now, I get it. Now this will develop. So you've got to understand that they might be an earlier age mentally at 15, but when they come to 19, 20, their development might improve. Can you expand upon that a little bit? Because you've been there. You've seen it.
I think the thing is, it just takes longer. So it's not that they can't reach that goal sometimes. It might take longer. So somebody that might tie their laces at 10, 11, they might tie their laces at 18, 21. It doesn't mean they can't get there. It just might take them a bit longer. But then, that's for everybody, I think, whether you've got a disability or not. Everyone develops at different rates, and who says what age you've got to mature at? I'm like in my 50s and I'm still trying to mature and at my age. So I think that's the reality of it. Who says when there is that time scale of development and whatever? And I think a lot of our young people, they do get there, and when we listen, like I listen to the groups and I work closely with them, it's just took them a little bit longer. So giving them that little bit of space and letting them to sort of have that maybe Kevin and Perry moment, maybe a little bit later, or some of those experiences, it doesn't matter because they gradually get there in the end. And
So
that's key.
looking at that next transition stage where they are into adulthood, what is there available? Can you tell us about your supported living, and why did you set up TPA supported living?
So obviously being foster carers and getting a little bit like dinosaurs and having grandchildren and thinking that, you know, that sort of is going to maybe change soon, you know, going from a very busy household with 5 children and doing all of the school runs and everything else. We then sat down, and we've been landlords for over 20 years. So we've privately rented to people. One of the houses became available, and we decided then, right, let's use our skills, let's use our property, let's do something that we've always wanted to do, and give, you know, young people, because there's a real, like for me, there's like residential care homes that are out there for maybe older people. Then you've got, you know, people that can live in the community with a bit of support, you know, have their own flat and maybe just have someone coming in for a few hours each week. But then there's the in-betweeners, and that's where I sort of sit, where these young people are very capable, you know, of living and doing everything within reason for themselves with the right support. So that's where TPA came in. So we was looking at our model where our young people come in, they don't need personal care. They just need support to promote personal care. They need support to budget, to cook, to go in the community, to wash, to go shopping, you know, to do all of these, do all their chores, you know, all of the things that me and you do and most people do. They are very, very capable of making their choices of what they want to eat, where they want to go, where they want to spend their money. They just need that support to be able to do it safely, and giving them that information so they can make those informed choices, and, you know, make a few positive risk taking and things like that. And I think that's the key, learning from a few mistakes that obviously aren't going to be safeguarding or anything, but it's just life in general. But you're there, you know, support workers are there with those gaps, you know. And there's stuff that you know, I've got some clients that are really, really good on the spectrum. You don't need to tell them about money. They don't need anyone to help them with their money. They know right down to the last penny what they've got in the bank. And so that might be one of their real strengths, but maybe they really do need a lot of help with that, managing their cooking and budgeting for their food. So there's so many different areas, and everyone is so unique. So I think that for me was having a really holistic approach and working with outside influences as well, you know, so everyone wrapping around, you know, they're in the center of everything we do. We listen to them, and then we listen to the network that they bring in. And so we make sure that wraparound network are who they want to be there with them, and that they're benefiting their lives.
And they feel valued as a member of
100%.
society, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and when you see somebody that, you know, probably has never been able to make decisions for themselves at times, or, you know, parents with all the will in the world, and I'm the same, you know, it's easier sometimes for us parents to do it, it's easier, it's quicker, it's all of those things. Then, you know, they've gone from, you know, maybe not even washing up, making their bed, you know, doing anything, and then now all of a sudden, you know, they're thinking about, oh, I'm going to change my washing powder this week, and they're learning to iron, and they're out in the community, they're volunteering. It's just amazing the things that they can do. And I think when their needs are recognised and their basic needs are met, then they can flourish. You
Can
know,
I can I ask as well, because you know, a question's come up here about delaying education and extending education for as long as possible. I know we have a young man that has been with us for 10 years, and he has become a greater safeguarding risk as he's going into adulthood now. And we would love him to remain in education for as long as is possible. Can you explain about that delay of education? Do you have individuals that are still at college, for example, or remain in some form of education? Tell us how that
I
works.
think the thing is with education, it's got to be relevant, and it's got to be not just a babysitting service. From my point of view, we need something that's going to be tangible, that there is an education being met there. So, you know, there are other organisations out in the community that can meet some of those needs practically, you know, so you could be under an education up until your age 25, you've got your EHC plan in place. But you don't have to be in a school or a college even, you know, with the EHC plan, you could go and get an apprenticeship. You know, there's other areas. As long as it's education, then it's tangible. So, you know, some of our young people, they might reach a bit of a plateau with academic work, and they might not be able to do that next level of a foundation or a GCSE. But what they can do is go out into the community and maybe carry on with some of those basic skills so they don't lose them. But then they can start to look at where they're practically, they sit, and what they can, add to the table that way. And again, most of them, again, know what they want. They like cooking, they like, hospitality, or they like music or whatever. They know, most people know what they want. And if they know and they're enjoying what they want, they're going to be engaged. It's when they're being pushed into different places where this is when the disengagement, and this is where the behaviors start to spill out, and then the frustration, and then the anger, the rage, and then that's when things start to break down. So this is where we don't want our young people to go, whatever disability. We want to be able to sort of help them to navigate and be empowered to make their choices. But if you don't know what a choice is as a young person, and what they are, and also the outcomes, you don't know how to make a choice. So I think that's key, is, it's okay having some choices, but if you don't know what those outcomes could be, positive and negative, you're not really informed. So you can't really make that choice.
Can I give a case study that I think is very commonplace? We've got, let's say it's somebody that has been in the care system for most of their life, and they haven't got a diagnosis of FASD. Then all of a sudden they get a diagnosis when they're around 15, 16, 17 years old. It is quite often later on that you might get that diagnosis as behaviors start to present themselves, and as misdiagnosis might present themselves. Then you find yourself in a position where you are coming out. You haven't got that wraparound system of support. You've got your care system around you, your network of foster families and friends. But then you find yourself moving from children's services in the care system into adult services. And you get a new social worker that doesn't understand you, doesn't know anything about FSD. Where do you go then? And you're being put into a placement that really doesn't support you. What do you do with that? What would a family, what would a foster carer, a parent, what would they do in that situation?
If you was concerned that, your young person was, not in a good place, or decisions were being made around them, and, you didn't feel that they were relevant, or they didn't want them, there's advocates, you can get an advocate. And I think sometimes family members are exhausted. They're absolutely fatigued, exhausted. They've had so many battles just to survive, getting to where they're at with their young people, because it's not even the young people, like I've said before, that the challenge is. It's like getting that diagnosis, getting those assessments, getting the right school, getting the benefits that get rejected. You're applying for things and you have to go to appeal. So this whole barrier thing that you're trying to navigate. And by the time you've gone through it, this child, now you're looking, you've got everything in place, and now we're looking at transition them out of it. So that's the thing, they're getting to that age. So I think, making sure that you're able to sort of support them, and look at ways within the system. Don't recreate the wheel. There's stuff out there. This is what I say to my families. We don't need to start having, FASD this, ADHD that. There is structures out there. There's an adult needs assessment for every young person that's got a need, and it doesn't matter whether it's Down syndrome, ADHD, or FASD. That is the assessment that will hopefully identify the needs, and then put that management plan in, support plan and funding if it's relevant. Now it's about how you advocate with your young person and show the need. And sometimes, if you don't understand how to fill forms out, you don't really understand the scaffolding you're putting in place. And some people, when people come like a social worker to do that assessment, I've done it when I was a foster carer. I stopped after a while. The house was like carnage when people would turn up, but you're tidying up, all the cushions are there, you're presenting it all nice to the social worker, you're doing all this, and when they're asking you these questions, you're answering it. And I can remember when I went to the clinic with Raja way back, and he gave me some forms, and he sat me in this room. He said, right, fill these out. And then I can remember going back in and he went, what have you done? I said, I filled it out. He went, but you filled it out saying that he can do all these things. I went, yeah, but he can. He said, but not without your support.
Mm.
And I went, oh, that's the key, isn't it? So it has to be for these young people, when you're saying in a form, an assessment form, can they eat? Yes, they can physically, and they can walk, and they can physically talk, and they can wash themselves, they can do all these things, but can they do it independently without a prompt, without support, without guidance? You know, that's the key. And the problem is a lot of our families that I see, they don't know how to respond, answer those questions. And sometimes the people that are actually doing the assessments maybe don't explain it or even understand it themselves.
And
So
there's
it's real explaining to families how to, you know, even with the forms like the DLA, the PIP, how to put that into text.
exactly. And you and my wife, Mim, frequently are supporting families in writing DLA applications, because it's the difference between one level of support and another level of financial support, isn't it? And it's about getting that level that is imperative in being able to support that individual and get them where they need to be. And now let's say that you've got your DLA, and can you explain the different levels of DLA for a start?
So I mean, they used
Disability living allowance, isn't it? Sorry.
disability, yeah. So there was 3 levels: lower, medium, and high. Now I think you've just got like the enhanced rate and the lower rate, which probably makes it a bit more simple. But actually, these are the tools really to identifying the needs. And if you can get the needs identified correctly, and sometimes you have to reapply and get them updated. So you might have filled out this form when this child was 7, but now they're 14. The needs might have changed. There might be less in certain areas or even higher in other areas. So you always have to revisit some of your assessments. And, you know, and knowing what assessments are out there is key to families to be able to, you know, do this transition into adulthood. So having you know, if your young person really lacks with like communication, so having an OT assessment, that really will help. So you're building like a jigsaw, a picture, so that when you are going to that next part of that transition into adult services, and you've got the children's services and them sort of like trying, you know, in the end linking up, communicating with each other, you're transferring all of that information over. And actually what I find sometimes is, you know, and it's really hard because, you know, everyone's got capacity unless they're deemed without having capacity, and then that's a different story. But everyone at the moment is deemed to have that capacity. So when sometimes as mask that capacity, and parents have been scaffolding that, maybe.
Can you just explain what capacity is?
So everyone's deemed to have capacity. Me and you've got capacity, and everyone's deemed to have that capacity. Now, sometimes in life, you know, we might lack that at times. So it could be that you might have a simple thing like a urine infection. You could not have capacity for 2 or 3 weeks and be in hospital. You might have a period of, you know, people have like comas, and sometimes they haven't got capacity. So somebody has to then, you know, support that person with their needs and their choices.
Does it mean that a capacity to be able to make a decision
Yeah.
about their own well-being?
Yeah. So it could be financial capacity, where they want to live. It could be safety, internet safety, you know, all of these things that, you know, our young people, and some of them might have capacity in certain areas and some might not. And so like some of our people on the spectrum have got capacity with their finances, so that's great. But then they might not have capacity about some of their other, where they want to live. They don't really understand that, what that means for them if they were going to move away from where they live at the moment, you know. And if they were going to move, they don't really understand what their choices are. And that's where we can come in, and social workers come in, and then they do capacity assessments. And they can be revisited, just because you might not have capacity as a 18-year-old, but when you're 27, like we've already said with FASD, 27, you've actually got more maturity, more knowledge, you know, your brain's developing a bit more, so that capacity could be coming back.
And actually, as you said earlier, and we had somebody say in the support group earlier, really recommend as you go through, get a reassessment so that we know that, you know, that the person that was assessed at the age of 9 or 10 is a very different person to their abilities when they're 15, 16 or 22, 23. So constant assessment's really important.
And can I just go back
Yeah,
to fluctuating capacity as well?
exactly. Yes.
This is really key. And I think I've really witnessed this, not just with, you know, people that I live with, but the wider people that I support. So when somebody comes in and does a capacity assessment, it's really key to be able to make that person feel comfortable to be able to have that assessment in the first place. So, you know, looking at the environment, looking at the person, you know, sometimes it might be a stranger that's doing these assessments. They don't know how to sort of communicate to them, their tone of voice, their body language could be threatening. So this person that, you know, on one day has got this capacity because of the setting the scene really around the assessment isn't correct, they will not be able to answer and articulate their answers, so they could be deemed not to have capacity. But then if they were having that assessment done in a different environment with different people with a different communication style, they would have capacity. So it's really, really key to really understand about this, because you don't want to take somebody's choices away when they actually have got capacity, but
And
you
it's
also don't want to not identify if they haven't, because they're really vulnerable then.
absolutely. And it's equally important to stress the fact that FASD individuals are very probably in a position to have fluctuating capacity, because there are a lot in the world, in all different sectors, do not understand that or understand what that means. And
Yeah.
it's really important for them to understand that. Can I move on? Because we've only got a few minutes left, and I really want to talk a little bit more about that supported living. You know, I always say this at the end of every single one of my webinars. I like to end on a positive note, because there is so much to get between the, you know, get the between the nitty gritty of everything to be able to find positive outcomes. Let's look at the positive outcomes that can occur with supported living for our individuals.
I think once you've, you know, identified the needs and you're working with them, and you know, any sort of transition, you know, even for any of us, I can remember, you know, leaving home and whatever. So there's going to be a few little hurdles, and there's going to be a few teething problems and a bit of trial and error. But if that person wants to do that journey, and then you're working with the organisation, you're working with the support staff, it is, you know, really key. I mean, I'm working with a family, and I've been working for 4 years in a transition, working from, you know, just doing some outreach, going out in the community, getting to know them, to doing some respite. And now we're working, you know, after 4 years, and obviously we had COVID in between, going into that next big step of like maybe going into supported living. So, but that's a 4 year, for me, piece of work, because that young person on the spectrum really needed to have that time and that trust. And I think there's an element with all of our young people and their families, is that trust. When you're giving something so precious, which is your children and like young adults, especially if they're vulnerable or got extra needs, sort of releasing them, it's really hard to do that as any parent, I know, but it's that trust and also that working together, because families, you know, are specialists in their young people far more than the social worker and the other people that might come into the mix, and they've all got value. But working with that young person in the center of it, and their family, and all of those amazing people that can wrap round, it's amazing the transition that can happen, you know, and the choices that they can make. We take people on holidays, you know, even just down to the life choices that they want to do. So we listen to them and ask them what they want, a bit like we do with the charity really. And then they design their services, they design their support, they design their week, their food, they design everything really. And we are really just on the outside helping them with that design. And when you see their confidence, you know, grow, you see them reach their goals, you see them have those relationships that, you know, they didn't really have, and feeling part of their community and those people that are caring about them and they're caring about them back. That's the bit that I think is really, really key. It's amazing to see when it works well.
And that is what we're looking for. You know, throughout this journey, one of the reasons we set up the charity in the first place was when we set down our rules of why we need this charity to be in place. It was to be able to lead to better outcomes for all our young people and our young adults. And when the fact that you've set up the charity and then set up a business because there was a gap in the market, there was something that wasn't there that needed to be there in supported living for those people, you set that up as well. You're an amazing inspiration to so many people. So, you know, on behalf of all of us, can I thank you for the work that you do and the work that your family does? You know, it goes unrecognized much of the time, but I know that we, you know, working alongside you for so many years, we get that buzz from those individuals that write back to us, those letters of appreciation to the success, to the smallest of successes. We love that, and that's what feeds us. And I know that that will feed many, many of the families that are attending this meeting tonight. So can I thank you on behalf of everybody tonight, Tracy? It's been a real pleasure as always.
Thank you.
And can I thank everybody for attending tonight? It's been a real pleasure to have you join us and to glean more insights, and also to be able to get the strategies and the resources and I like to think a bit of hope for the future as well. So thank you for joining us. If you found this useful, please do go on to our YouTube channel and look at all the other webinars that we have produced over the last couple of years. There are anecdotes in there. There are bits of strategies and coping mechanism and resources that will help you as well. If you found all of this useful, we are a charity that is dependent on raising our own funds to be able to maintain the work that we do. If you feel this has been helpful, and for the price of a cup of coffee, please go onto our website at www.fasdawareness.org.uk and go and press that donate button. It would really help us an awful lot, because everything that we do goes into supporting our families and our individuals. Well, another one's finished. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Tracy. Good night.
You're welcome. Thank you.